They called themselves soldiers of Christ, but history remembers them as the Pope's most powerful weapon. This is the secret world of the Jesuit Order, and the vow that changed the Church forever. The Jesuit Order, the Fourth Vow and political influence. The silent army of the Holy See. Welcome back to Secrets of Catholicism, where we peel back the layers of history and examine the institutions that have quietly shaped the world. Today we confront the paradox of power and piety embodied by the Society of Jesus, better known simply as the Jesuits. Disclaimer: this content is for educational and analytical purposes only. It is not financial, investment or legal advice. The name Jesuit evokes two very different images in the public mind. On one hand, the brilliant, compassionate educator running some of the world's most prestigious universities. On the other, the dark, shadowy figure, the conspirator in political dramas, the ultimate manipulator, pulling strings from the deepest recesses of the Vatican. They have been praised as the most dedicated missionaries and condemned as the most dangerous political architects. But who are they truly? The Jesuits are not merely a religious order. They are an intellectual, spiritual, and geopolitical force. Founded nearly 500 years ago, they currently number over 14,000 priests and brothers globally, but their influence far outweighs their numbers. They manage over 2 educational and charitable institutions, including dozens of highly influential universities like Georgetown, Boston College, and the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome, which functions as the Vatican's own intellectual academy, training future bishops and cardinals from around the globe. This network of influence means that Jesuit-trained individuals are woven into the fabric of global leadership in politics, science, and the arts. The key to their sustained global impact is their founding principle: absolute mobility and singular devotion to the papacy. Unlike other monastic orders who live in cloistered environments or vow stability to a specific location, the Jesuits were designed to be deployed. They are spiritual special forces, trained to infiltrate, adapt, and influence the highest levels of secular and religious power, often in hostile territories. They are, in the words of many historians, the Pope's shock. This brings us to the core mystery we must unravel: the Fourth Vow. It is this secretive final commitment that separates the fully professed Jesuit from all other religious men and grants the Pope an unprecedented tool of global governance. It is the spiritual equivalent of a military chain of command, ensuring that in a world where papal authority was constantly challenged by kings and emperors, the Jesuit order remained Rome's unwavering anchor. The existence of this vow has fueled centuries of conspiracy theories, suggesting that the Jesuits answer to a higher hidden power than the local bishop or even the local government. Today, that mystery deepens because for the first time in history, the head of the Catholic Church, Pope Francis, is himself a Jesuit. The man who takes the vow of papal obedience is now the recipient of that very obedience, closing the loop on 5 centuries of unique power dynamics. To understand the full political and spiritual weight of the Jesuit order, we must begin at their explosive inception, a moment in history that demanded a revolutionary spiritual army to save the Catholic Church from collapse. What did it take to transform a wounded soldier into the founder of this powerful, secretive institution? That story starts with a cannonball and a crippled knight. Genesis. From knight to theologian, from knight to theologian. The story of the Jesuit order does not begin in a library or a monastery. It begins on a 16th-century battlefield. The founder, Inigo López de Loyola, later known as Ignatius, was initially anything but spiritual. He was a Spanish nobleman, a proud, vain soldier obsessed with glory, honor, and courtly romance. His life's trajectory changed irrevocably in 1521, during the Battle of Pamplona, where a French cannonball shattered his leg. This injury was the crucible of the Jesuit transformation. While recovering from a painful, often crude series of surgeries aimed at straightening his leg for cosmetic reasons, a testament to his pride, Ignatius demanded reading material. He asked for the popular chivalric romances of the day, but the only books available in the house were the Life of Christ and the Lives of the Saints. Bored and confined, he began to read them, What followed was a profound spiritual experience. As he read the tales of great martyrs and holy men, Ignatius began to notice a pattern. When he imagined himself doing the deeds of the saints, selfless acts, poverty, chastity, his heart was filled with lasting peace and joy. When he imagined himself returning to his former life of vanity and earthly ambition, the pleasure was fleeting, leaving behind a feeling of emptiness. This experience formed the cornerstone of the Jesuit spiritual method, discernment of spirits, a practice of identifying the movements of good and evil within the soul to guide action. The crippled knight was reborn as a pilgrim. Abandoning his title, armor, and wealth, Ignatius dedicated himself to a life of austerity and service. He spent a year in Manresa, a cave near Barcelona, where he underwent intense mystical experiences and codified his spiritual insights into the Spiritual Exercises, the definitive training manual for all future Jesuits. This manual is not a theoretical text. It's a demanding 30-day retreat designed to strip away worldly attachments and realign the will completely with the will of Jesus. It is the psychological and spiritual boot camp that guarantees the absolute obedience of the order. The crucial takeaway from the founding years is this: the Society of Jesus was structured not by traditional monastic rules, but by the principles of military command and rigorous intellectual self-mastery. The goal was not quiet contemplation, but action in the world. The world needed saving. The year 1540 saw the Church reeling from the Protestant Reformation, which was tearing Catholic Europe apart. The Jesuits were approved by Pope Paul III with a singular immediate mission: to serve as the Pope's intellectual shock troops in the Counter-Reformation. They were to be highly educated, utterly mobile, and loyal to the death. They were soldiers for Christ, ready to penetrate the royal courts, the universities, and the farthest corners of the globe, the ultimate missionary order designed to fight heresy and reclaim lost souls for Rome. Their structure and purpose directly answered the crisis of their age, setting the stage for their unique and often controversial role in global politics. Three, the Fourth Vow, the key to absolute power. The Fourth Vow, the true source of the Jesuit Order's historic power and the centuries of conspiracy theories surrounding them, lies not in their educational prestige or their missionary zeal, but in a specific, unique oath taken by a select few. The Fourth Vow. Most traditional religious orders, Franciscans, Dominicans, Benedictines, require members to take the three fundamental vows: poverty, living without personal possessions; chastity, celibacy; and obedience, obeying the superior of their order. The Jesuits take these, but the highest echelon, the professed fathers, take a fourth, extraordinary vow, a special vow of absolute obedience to the reigning pope, regarding mission and deployment. What does this mean in practical terms? It means that any fully professed Jesuit can be instantly dispatched by the pope, not by the Jesuits' own superior general, and certainly not by the local bishop or civil authority, to any part of the world whatsoever where the Holy Father may judge it expedient to send them. This vow bypasses the normal ecclesiastical bureaucracy, creating a direct military-style line of command between the Jesuit and the papacy. Historically, this was a game-changer. During the 16th and 17th centuries, when the Pope's political and spiritual authority was constantly being eroded by national monarchies, France, Spain, Portugal, the Jesuit Order provided the papacy with its own private global intelligence and action network. They were the Pope's eyes and ears in foreign courts, his negotiators during complex political crises, and his most persuasive theological champions at crucial moments in history. They acted without national allegiance, recognizing only the supreme authority of the Bishop of Rome. This absolute, unhesitating obedience is the primary fuel for the dark side of the Jesuit legend. Kings and governments did not trust them. Why? Because a Jesuit tutor advising a royal heir, or a Jesuit confessor hearing the sins of a queen, was ultimately reporting spiritually and intellectually to Rome. Their loyalty was extraterritorial. They were often viewed as a fifth column, an army within the state, fundamentally loyal to a sovereign outside its borders. The famous line attributed to Ignatius, "If the Church shall define anything to be black which appears to our eyes to be white, we ought in like manner to pronounce it to be black, underscores this radical commitment to institutional authority over even personal sensory perception. The Fourth Vow is the mechanism that gave the Pope a direct, secret, and highly effective instrument to project power into the most critical political and religious theaters of the world, making the Society of Jesus the most feared and respected order in Catholic history. Fourth, the educational strategy, power in the academies. Power in the academies. If the Fourth Vow was the Jesuits' engine of political mobility, then education was their primary weapon for long-term global influence. Ignatius recognized early on that winning the Counter-Reformation was not simply about converting heathens, it was about capturing the minds of the next generation of leaders. He established a revolutionary system of education that was for its time unprecedentedly advanced, disciplined, and free. The core of their strategy was the Ratio Studiorum, plan of studies, finalized in 1599. This was the first standardized curriculum in the Western world, governing every aspect of teaching, from grammar and rhetoric to philosophy and theology, ensuring uniformity and excellence across their vast network of colleges. The goal was to produce not just faithful Catholics, but intellectually rigorous thinkers capable of defending the faith against all challenges, from Protestantism to the burgeoning scientific revolution. Crucially, Jesuit schools offered a comprehensive education free of charge. This was a radical concept in 16th-century Europe, where elite education was reserved only for the wealthy. By opening their schools to the children of the poor and the nobility alike, they accomplished three strategic goals: gaining influence by educating the sons of kings, princes, dukes, and a newly emerging mercantile class. They embedded themselves into the social and political elite of every country. The Jesuit-educated statesmen of the 17th century became the people who ran European courts and eventually the colonies. 2. Intellectual dominance. The Jesuits trained the finest minds of their era in mathematics, astronomy, and physics. They were highly involved in empirical science, viewing the study of the natural world as the study of God's handiwork. For example, they were responsible for 35 craters on the moon being named after Jesuit scientists. They were not anti-science. They were champions of scientific rigor within a theological framework. 3. Spiritual formation. The education was holistic. The goal was to instill the Jesuit principles of rigorous self-examination, from the spiritual exercises, into every student, creating leaders who were morally formed as well as intellectually sharp, a concept they termed cura personalis, care for the entire person. This education system made Dong Ten indispensable. Governments might hate their political interference, but they were dependent on the Jesuits for educating their children and civil servants. This profound dependency created a shield of influence, making any attack on the Jesuit order an attack on the intellectual infrastructure of the nation itself. It was the ultimate, long-term political strategy: control the conversation by controlling the educators. Political influence and global missions. Global missions and political clashes. The intellectual prowess forged in Jesuit academies was immediately deployed onto the global stage, leading to both spectacular missionary successes and violent political clashes. This section details how the Jesuits' Fourth Vow translated into geopolitical action, transforming the religious landscape of the world. The Jesuits' initial and most powerful tool was cultural accommodation, a radical approach that often put them at odds with other Catholic orders. While many European missionaries demanded that converts completely abandon local customs and adopt Western dress and language, the Jesuits believed in meeting people where they were. The most famous example is the mission to China, spearheaded by Matteo Ricci, a brilliant cartographer and sinologist, chose to dress as a Confucian scholar, not as a European. He mastered the Mandarin language, immersed himself in Chinese philosophy, and used Western technology like clocks, maps, and astronomical instruments to gain entry and respect among the imperial court's elite. He argued that traditional Chinese ancestral rites were civil ceremonies, not pagan worship, and could therefore be reconciled with Christianity. This approach allowed the Jesuits to convert powerful mandarins and even members of the royal family, giving them immense political access. However, this policy of accommodation, known as the Chinese rites controversy, became the Jesuits' biggest political liability. Other Catholic orders, particularly the Dominicans and Franciscans, viewed this as a dangerous compromise with heresy. They formally complained to the Vatican, arguing that the Jesuits were diluting the faith. The controversy raged for over a century, culminating in papal condemnations in the 18th century that ultimately undermined the Jesuit mission and severely damaged the Church's relationship with China for generations. This clash exposed the deep tension between the Jesuits' pragmatic, political approach to global expansion and the conservative doctrinal standards of the wider Church. Beyond China, the Jesuits established independent, self-governing communities, or reductions in South America, particularly in Paraguay. These reductions were Christian utopias for indigenous Guarani people, protecting them from enslavement by Spanish and Portuguese colonists. The Jesuits organized the Guarani into self-sufficient, highly disciplined societies, teaching them trades, and even forming their own militia for defense. This was perhaps the most direct political action taken by any religious order, creating a state within a state that challenged the authority of the Spanish and Portuguese crowns by blocking their access to cheap labor slaves. This defiance of colonial powers created powerful enemies in Europe, enemies who would eventually demand the order's complete annihilation. The Jesuits were caught between the papacy's mission and the political greed of the Catholic empires. The Suppression, the annihilation of the Society of Jesus, the suppression of the Jesuits. The 18th century marked a catastrophic turning point. The political backlash against the Jesuits became so overwhelming that even the papacy, the very institution they had vowed absolute obedience to, could not save them. The culmination of their long history of political friction, intellectual rivalry, and economic success led to their global suppression. The primary motivation for the suppression was not theological. It was purely geopolitical and economic. The powerful Bourbon monarchs of Europe, in France, Spain, Portugal, and Naples, viewed the Jesuits as the main obstacle to their absolute rule. Why? Economic autonomy. The Jesuits had amassed considerable wealth through their global network of trade and reductions, running successful businesses and plantations. Kings, desperately seeking funds for their European wars, coveted this wealth. 2. Unwavering loyalty to Rome. The Fourth Vow meant the Jesuits served a foreign power, the Pope before the local king. In an age of rising national secularism, this was intolerable. Jesuit influence was considered a threat to national sovereignty. 3. Political intrigue. Jesuits were often used as scapegoats for political failures and regicides. The assassination of kings. Though evidence was often flimsy, the narrative of the plotting Jesuit was potent. The dominoes began to fall rapidly. Portugal expelled the Jesuits in 1759, confiscating their property. France followed in 1764, and the greatest blow came from Spain in 1767, which expelled 6,000 Jesuits from its territories, loading them onto ships and dumping them onto the Papal States' shores. Faced with the threat of schism, the Catholic monarchs threatened to break away from Rome entirely. Pope Clement XIV finally yielded to the immense political pressure. In 1773, he issued the papal brief Dominus ac Redemptor, which formally dissolved the Society of Jesus throughout the world. This was one of the most shocking acts in church history. The Pope was forced to destroy his own most loyal and formidable army. The act was dramatic and swift. Jesuit houses and colleges were seized, their property nationalized, and thousands of priests and brothers were forced to renounce their vows or face imprisonment or exile. Ironically, the order only survived in two non-Catholic nations: Prussia, under Frederick the Great, and Russia, under Catherine the Great, both of whom recognized the Jesuits' superior educational and organizational skills and simply ignored the papal decree for economic reasons. This bizarre twist allowed the thread of the society to survive until its eventual restoration. Seven. Conclusion. The modern legacy and Pope Francis. The modern legacy. The Society of Jesus was officially restored by Pope Pius VII in 1814. Following the turbulent Napoleonic era, the papacy,
Having learned the painful lesson of relying solely on political powers, desperately needed the Jesuits' discipline and intellectual vigor to rebuild the Church after the Enlightenment and the French Revolution. However, the restored Jesuit order was changed. While their commitment to education and the Fourth Vow remained, their focus shifted slightly. They became less involved in the direct political intrigue of royal courts and moved their intellectual power towards social justice, science, and the humanities. This modern mission is perhaps best encapsulated by their current emphasis on faith and justice, and their commitment to serving the marginalized. Today, the Jesuit legacy is one of the most powerful forces in Catholicism. They run the Vatican Observatory, where Jesuit astronomers continue the order's long tradition of scientific inquiry. They are leaders in environmentalism and ethical debates, often pushing the boundaries of traditional church thought. But the most significant development in 5 centuries is the ascension of Jorge Mario Bergoglio, now Pope Francis, the first Jesuit pope in history. His election in 2013 was a stunning statement about the central role the Jesuits now play. The man who once took the vow of absolute obedience to the Pope is now the Pope himself. His papacy is a reflection of the core Jesuit values: emphasis on poverty, action in the world, going to the peripheries, intellectual curiosity, and a willingness to confront entrenched power structures, both within the Church and in the global economy. This final, powerful twist of history, a Jesuit leading the Church, underscores that the silent army is no longer just on the perimeter. It is now leading from the very heart of the Vatican. The story of the Jesuits is a testament to the enduring power of discipline, intellect, and radical loyalty. They were an organization designed to save the Church, and ended up being its most potent, most feared, and most controversial political instrument. Call to action. What is your opinion on the Jesuits' Fourth Vow? Do you believe absolute loyalty to a single foreign authority is necessary for a global mission, or does it inevitably lead to political abuse? Share your insights and perspectives in the comments below. If you found this deep dive valuable, please take a moment to like this video, share it with others, and be sure to subscribe to the channel for more fascinating journeys into the secrets of Catholicism.